Thank you. So Pesach is often dreaded. People are often, very nervous when they hear Purim is coming. It's like, oh no, that means I have only a month till Pesach. You have 3 weeks till Pesach. This is, and there's a lot of work involved, and that's the reason why people are very nervous. They know there's a lot to do, and there's so little time. And what happens is, Yontif is obviously should not be something that we dread. That's very sad. It gives the wrong message to our families. It's the wrong message for ourselves. Why should it be something we dread? If anything, Yontif is man simchasenu, the time of our happiness, of our simcha, of our rejoicing, and it should be a very happy time. In general, in terms of our families, Pesach is maybe one of the most impactful times of the year. It's the one time we have this mitzvah of Yigad Televincha that you should tell your children. And interestingly enough, we find that many children. It's so widespread to have a Seder, even families that don't necessarily follow much, right? It's like two things they're going to do. It's Yom Kippur, they'll go to synagogue, and Pesach, the Seder. That's one thing that, that kind of sticks with people their whole lives. So why should the time leading up to it be the time of stress and pressure and tension and nervousness? No, none of that should exist. It should really be a very happy time, a joyous time. People should be anticipating Pesach, be excited about Pesach. And the reality is that all the preparation that's done, and it's true, there is a lot of preparation involved, we have to realize that according to the letter of the law, not all of it is actually required. Okay, in fact, much of what is done, the widespread preparation of Pesach is actually not required. Okay, some of it is we can call stringency, okay, extra, we call them chumran in Hebrew, extra credit, which is a good thing, but it's a stringency nonetheless. And some of it is completely unnecessary. It's nice to have a clean house for young people and all that. I know some people, for them, when they come into a Pesach and they know they went through every single cabinet and every single drawer and they, every window is sparkling clean, it makes them feel good. And all that is beautiful that, maybe they should do all these different things, but to realize it shouldn't come at the expense of creating all this tension in the home and this sense of tension and everything else that goes along with it. You shouldn't come to the Seder feeling, completely exhausted and wiped out because you just worked for a month straight, and you didn't stop. You're running a marathon of cleaning and all that. That's definitely not what's intended. I myself remember working so hard leading up to a Seder. By the time I got to the Seder, I was just so tired, exhausted. I could barely, stay awake. Of course, I pushed myself through it, but that's not the way we're supposed to walk into a Seder. We should come in, full of energy, excitement, and really, this is such an important time to make an impact on our families and ourselves. From a spiritual perspective, from a family perspective, really, really important. So what this class is going to be about is really just narrowing it down according to the letter of the law, what must be done. And it's not to say that if you want to do more, or if you know people who do more, that we should go ahead and mock that. On the contrary, if they're doing a stringency or whatever, that's great. We never mock a stringency or a cussing or whatever. But our function is to recognize what is required according to the letter of the law. And anything more than that is now you get to put into the scale. Is it worth it or is it not? And you get to make that decision. Okay, we have to fulfill the requirements, what's basic requirements according to the letter of the law. Beyond that is, well, that depends. Is it going to wipe me out? Is it going to bring extra stress and tension? Is it going to make me, yell at my spouse that why didn't they do this and why did they do that? Then maybe it's not worth it. Okay, so that's exactly what we're going to discuss. What, according to the letter of the law, must be done to prepare for Pesach. Okay, so let's start from the beginning, and this is really understanding the foundation of this is really what it's all about. Okay, and the foundation is as follows. When it comes to chametz, we find two prohibitions in the Torah. Two. One of them is which seem very simple. It's going to require some explanation, but it's relatively simple. And that prohibition is you cannot eat chametz. Very simple. Can't eat it, right? Just like you can't eat a lot of things as a Jew, right? We can't eat pork, and we can't eat milk and meat. We can't eat chametz. Sounds simple. We'll see that's not quite as simple, but it sounds simple enough. The second prohibition is you're not allowed to own chametz. Okay, this is what makes chametz somewhat unique in that we don't find this in other things, right? There's no prohibition, for example, to own bacon. I can own a big package of bacon and there's no prohibition whatsoever, right? But chametz has this extra prohibition, you're not even allowed to own it. And this is what makes things a little bit more challenging. In fact, if you take a look, the Ran, one of the commentaries in the Talmud, he says the reason why, now we don't always necessarily have reasons why the Torah says what it says. We accept it. God told us, that's enough for us. But here he says, perhaps by chametz, there's a reason why the Torah says we can't own chametz. And perhaps the reason is because chametz is unique in the sense that a whole year we eat this, right? After Pesach, we will continue to eat this. And it's just a short amount of time where we're not eating this. And this is something that can get people, confused. They can make a mistake. They can forget. They can end up eating it accidentally. If it's around, you might eat it. Very simple. And it's logical. It makes sense. He says also it's a very stringent law, right? It's one of what we call the chayve krisos. It's as severe as eating on Yom Kippur, right? And violating the Shabbos and all that. Chametz is a very severe type of prohibition. Those are the two things he says as to why the Torah went the extra mile, so to speak, and it's forbidden not only to eat it, but even to own it. To have it in your possession is forbidden. Okay, so that's something that's unique. Now, how do we avoid this? All right, if you right now realize in your home you own lots and lots of chametz right now, at this very moment, right? You probably have boxes of pasta, box of cereal. You have bread in the house, bagels, cookies, all kinds of wonderful things. They're all chametz. How is a person supposed to get out of this problem? Because in how many days we have left? 10, 11 days. It's going to be prohibited to not only eat it, but even to own it. So what do we do? So I'm going to go with, step by step. According to the Torah, tells us in the Shulchan Aruch, according to the Torah, it is sufficient to simply nullify the chametz. Okay, what does nullify the chametz mean? Perhaps you've said the nullification in the past. In Aramaic, it starts with the words kol chamira. Any leavened bread that I own should become ownerless like the dust of the earth. That's called bittul. That's called nullification. Okay? So, by the way, it's important to stress this. It's very important to do this every year. We actually do it twice. We do it once right after the search for the chametz. That night, right after we finish the search, we do it one time, and then we do it again when we burn the chametz. Okay, those are the two times we usually do it. This year, because Erev Pesach is actually Shabbos, the second time we do it is actually going to be on Shabbos. It's not going to be together with the burning. Okay, so something to remember. Right there, probably around 10:30, somewhere between 10:30 and 11:30 in the morning on Shabbos morning, we're going to say this. Right, and we're not going to be together. And I want a way of reminding you, but maybe ask someone in the home to remind you. We're going to say again a kol chamira. This nullification is required. It's something that I realize that people don't realize how important this is. The stuff like the searching for the chametz and the burning the chametz, that stuff you do. People remember that, they know about it, but the nullification, they sometimes forget or don't realize that it's actually important. It's actually very important. In fact, according to the Torah, that's all you need to do. Okay, so let's explain what that means. I can walk right now into my house, right? I am in my house. I can walk in the middle of my house and say all of the leavened products, all of the pastas and breads and all that good stuff should be nullified, should be ownerless like dust of the earth, and I am done. I just did my entire Pesach preparation in around 2.5 seconds. And according to the Torah, it's true. You're finished. Okay, so on a Torah level, on a biblical level, you're finished. But of course, we know whenever I say there's a biblical level, we know there's another level, and that's the rabbinic level. Came along the rabbis and said, 1 second, we still have a concern. Because if I simply go into my house and say everything should be ownerless like the dust of the earth, I have two problems. Number one, well, first of all, do you mean it? Right? Imagine I wait outside someone's house. I know he has a stash of bourbon and scotch, and he's got $150. Or I'm undershooting that. He has $500 worth of bottles of whiskey in his cabinet. I simply wait for him to announce his kol chamira, everything is ownerless, like the dust of the earth, and I knock on the door and say, "Oh, very nice. I came to collect all that is ownerless, like the dust of the earth." Right? What is he going to say to me? He'll say to me, "Get out of here." Right? In other words, do you really mean it? Right? So for some of the things, maybe you don't mind. You have a quarter box of Cheerios left. Maybe that's okay. But the whiskey cabinet's a different story. So do you truly mean to make it ownerless like the dust of the earth? That's the first problem the rabbis had. And the second thing the rabbis had is the more basic problem. Well, if the whole concern is you may come to eat it, so then what does it help to say it's ownerless if it's sitting there on your dining room table and sitting there in your cabinet and sitting there, exactly where it sits a whole year, you may still come to eat it, right? Maybe you won't realize. Maybe you'll forget. You'll take a nash. You won't realize before it's too late. You already ate chametz. So the rabbi said it's not enough to rely on bittul, to rely on nullification. We have to do something more. Okay, so that's the breakdown. On a biblical level, just nullify it. You're finished. On a rabbinic level, they had certain concerns that they required more of us. So what did they require of us? So they said you have to actually literally remove it from the premises. You can't have it around. If it's around, even if it's nullified, even if it's ownerless, even if it's what we call in Hebrew hefker, anyone can come and take it. Nonetheless, you can't have it around. You have to get rid of it. It has to be out. Okay, and from that came the law that first of all you have to destroy or get rid of whatever chametz you own, and you even have to go searching for it because it may be anywhere. As you know, chametz throughout the year can wind up in all kinds of places. You have to check all those places that chametz might be, and you have to actually physically remove it from the premises. Okay, and that came the mitzvah of biur chametz, what we do, the search for chametz and the destruction of the chametz, right? You don't actually have to burn all the chametz. You can search for chametz and eat the chametz. You can search for the chametz and give it away to somebody, right? All you have to do is simply remove all this chametz from your premises. Okay, that is the second mitzvah. That's again a rabbinic obligation based on this concern, and it's a very real, very legitimate concern. It makes a lot of sense. Okay, so I just want to clarify this searching for chametz. I spoke about this actually today between Mincha Marav. People have a misconception. I also grew up searching for chametz is like this little elaborate hide and seek game. People go, they hide pieces of bread, and you have to go find them. And if you catch them, you win. And if you don't find them, then you have to keep searching until you find them. That's some kind of game, but it's really nothing to do with that at all. In fact, the custom of putting out the bread is something that came about much later. It's a custom. It's not at all required. If it's your custom, you should continue doing it. It's a beautiful custom. The Arizal gives all kinds of secrets as to why this custom exists. But according to the letter of the law, that's not what searching for chametz is all about. It's not about finding pieces of bread that somebody hid. B'dikas chametz means searching literally for pieces of chametz that you need to find that may be in your home, anywhere. That's really the job. And actually, you have to go and sit and search, and it takes time sometimes. You actually have to go do quite a search. You have to go through all the places where chametz can technically be brought throughout the year, and you have to make sure there's nothing there. Okay, because if it's there, there's a violation going on. At this point, if you made the bittul, the nullification, it would be a rabbinic prohibition, right? If any chametz is still there. If you didn't do the nullification, then you have a biblical issue if chametz is still there. Okay, so that's why we search and we destroy. Okay, now it's very important to clarify what is the type of chametz that we are searching for. By the way, before I get further, I just want to point out this year the search for chametz is going to be Thursday night. Okay, I didn't speak all this out right away. Thursday night, even though it's a day early, usually it would be the 14th, right? This year is going to be Thursday night, a night early, because Friday night you can't do most of it. You can't search it. Well, you can search, I guess, but you can't destroy it. So it's done Thursday night. Friday morning it's burnt. Okay, and hopefully we'll get out a schedule pretty soon with all the details and all the times. Okay, now the question is, what is the chametz that we are referring to? What type of chametz are we talking about? We say you have to search for it, you have to get rid of it, you have to nullify it, you have a prohibition if it's still there, you have a Torah biblical prohibition, bal yirah, bal yimatzeh, it should not be, chametz should not be found. What chametz are we referring to? Are we referring to crumbs? Are we referring to big pieces? What are we referring to? Okay, so let's just break it down. Very, very simple. Based on what we learned, technically, once a person nullifies the chametz, right? He nullifies, makes it ownerless. He's technically finished on a biblical level. There's a concern, however, maybe he doesn't mean it, or maybe he's going to eat it. So first, let's deal with the first concern. Maybe he doesn't mean it. Maybe it's such important chametz that he doesn't mean it. Well, let's say it's really insignificant chametz, like crumbs on your floor. Do I have any concern that if I nullify the crumbs on my floor, they're ownerless, anyone can come and take it? Is there any concern that I don't mean it? Right? You can come and take the crumbs on my floor. Anyone wants, it's available. I have lots of crumbs. Feel free to come, bring a broom, bring a vacuum, take all the crumbs you want. Do you really have a concern I don't mean it? So that's number one. And number two, is there a concern I'm going to eat it for real? Crumbs on the floor? How about the crumbled up cookie under the couch? You think there's really a concern someone's going to come and eat that? Right? So if we take this into consideration, it all of a sudden makes it that these insignificant types of chametz are really not what we're concerned about. If you made the bittul, you made the nullification, you're really finished. The only concern the rabbis had were on chametz that's actually somewhat important, or something you may actually come to eat. And this is really what separates the Pesach preparation that's obligated from the type that's really not obligatory at all. And let's try to explain what this means. Okay, when we say we're searching for chametz or we're getting rid of chametz, we don't mean crumbs on the floor. We don't mean the crumbled cookie under the couch. We don't mean, something that lost, any semblance of food. We're not talking about that. We're talking about something that's actually worthwhile, that has some significance to it, and that's something you may actually eat. Okay, so the rules we have are either it's a kezias or bigger. Kezias means the size of an olive. Okay, if it's at least the size of an olive, then in Torah language and halacha language, it has significance. So even if it's not pretty, but it's at least a kezias, it's at least the olive size, that you have to get rid of. Okay, so that you would have to get rid of. If it's smaller than an olive size, and I want to underline the word and it's not something you might come to eat, it is totally fine to leave it in your home for the duration of Pesach. There's no prohibition, neither biblical nor rabbinic, provided that you did the bittul, provided that it's something you're not going to come to eat, it is totally fine. Okay, so this really says to us that any crumbs in the house, that's not what we're looking for when we do B'dikas Chametz. And we'll talk about the kitchen in a minute. I want to leave the kitchen out. Someone just direct messaged me about crumbs in the kitchen. The kitchen may be a bit different, but let's leave the kitchen out of this for a minute. You go around the home, anywhere else in the house, let's say, and there are crumbs somewhere on the floor. They're not clean. You may have crumbs on a shelf somewhere in a cabinet, aside from the kitchen. All that is not a problem to own on Pesach. Okay, so all the scrubbing and cleaning and all that, that it really is not really part of Pesach preparation according to the letter of the law. It might be nice to have a clean house for Pesach, but that's not actually obligatory according to the letter of the law when it comes to Pesach. You do not need to scrub anything. You don't need to, seemingly you wouldn't need to vacuum anything, right? There's no need to vacuum because vacuum generally picks up small things that are inedible, right? None of this would be relevant. Obviously, you don't have to go wash the windows. The windows have nothing to do with, I'm not sure what people are cleaning off the windows when they do that. I know growing up, it was my job to pull out drawers all over the house and take everything out and wipe every corner of it. If we're not talking about the kitchen, there's really no reason. I mean, you can do it because it's nice and it's nice to have a deep clean and a beautiful home coming into Pesach, but it's actually not obligatory at all to do this. You don't have to, I mean, there's a lot of things we do before Pesach that's absolutely unnecessary. I mentioned last year how a woman once woke up in the morning, right after Purim, and she hears everyone banging. And she looks out the window. She sees people taking out their mattresses and their carpets, and they're banging out. I guess, a full year worth of dust. That's settled into their mattresses or into their blankets. They're banging. And she's like wondering, what does this have to do with Pesach preparation exactly? What is going on? And none of this has to do with Pesach preparation. It's just totally. It's nice to do a spring clean. It's beautiful. Just realize this has nothing to do with Pesach. And in fact, I'll take it a step further. In the halacha, we don't find the concept called cleaning for Pesach. It doesn't exist. We find the concept searching for chametz. That we find searching. And when you're searching for actual chametz. You're searching for, significant pieces of chametz, not for crumbs. Okay, there's no requirement to remove crumbs or anything of that nature. Okay, so when I just want to point out, when I'm talking about crumbs, I'm talking about two things. Number one, they're smaller than an olive size. Number two, they're not something that someone would ordinarily eat. Okay, so they're a little dirty, or they're just not in an hygienic kind of place. If they are, kept clean and they're hygienic, so that's different, Or if they're bigger than a kazayit and an olive size, that would be different as well. Okay, so this really should change a lot of things for people. What are we looking for? What is the chametz that we're talking about? It's not the crumbs around the house. Now, one of the things halacha does mention to straighten up before the search for chametz, just so that it's easier to search. That it does say. It says straighten up. There's the word, straighten up a little bit, Erev, the day before, the night of the search of chametz, straighten up the home. So it's easier to check. It's easier to look around when things are orderly, right? When the house is a mess, it's hard to search for things, right? But when it's orderly, it's easier. So do that. That's the entire requirement to clean before Pesach, nothing else. I'm going to bring you a proof to this point, and you'll see just how far it goes. This year on Pesach, I'm not really talking about it right now so much, but a lot of people are going to eat bread Shabbos morning. Okay, Shabbos morning, a lot of people are going to eat bread. Now the house is already, I mentioned, is Pesach, right? It's all ready for Pesach. The house is clean, spick and span for Pesach. Now Shabbos morning, a lot of people are going to eat bread. So says the Mishnah Berurah, how do you do this? So he says, very simple. You put out a tablecloth, you eat bread on that tablecloth. And after you're done, you just shake off the tablecloth, put it back, and now you can eat the rest of your meal. That's what the Mishnah Berurah tells us. Now when he says shake it off, he means shake it off really well. Make sure there are no crumbs left. Now, I ask you, I don't think there's a single person in this chat or anywhere else that would allow you simply to throw and shake around your tablecloth with crumbs all over the house. Are you kidding me? Erev Pesach, you're going to be shaking off your tablecloth with crumbs all over the place? Are you kidding me? How in the world is that? No Jewish mother is going to allow this, right? How in the world is that okay? Well, the Mishnah Berurah, this is another source that the Mishnah Berurah is telling us that there's no problem to have crumbs on the floor in your house. That's not an issue. That's not a problem. The problem is having significant pieces of chametz that you may come to eat. Okay, here I have a question sent to me. A pretzel that fell into the track of the seat of the car that is not accessible. Leave it, not applicable. Okay, great question. I don't know how big this pretzel is. If it's smaller than the size of an olive, And I would think that that track of the car probably is not very hygienic at this point. My guess is the pretzel's not the first piece of food that fell in there. Probably other stuff falls in there too. If it's less than a kazait, then this totally applies, what we just mentioned. And the same halach applies. It's nothing you have to be concerned with. If you're talking about one of those big pretzels, then maybe that would be the size of a kazait. And then the question would change. Then it's a more complicated question. Chametz that you can't get to, and the Shulchan Aruch talks about it. So maybe we'll leave that for now, but that'll be a different type of question. I want to point out, in general, vacuuming the car, right? I mean, a lot of people, they get the car cleaned before Pesach, and it's a great thing to do. Do you have to get the car cleaned before? Is it obligatory, or let's say, I didn't get to it, is that okay? I still have all the crumbs, okay? So obviously some people have their car, no one ever eats in the car, right? I wish I had that policy. I wish I was able to follow through on that policy, but practically speaking, there's quite a few crumbs on the floor of my car. Now, is it obligatory to clean that up, to get that vacuum, to get it, car cleaned? So according to what we're saying, technically, there shouldn't be a problem because they're all crumbs. They're not edible. They're not exactly anything that's on that floor nobody wants to eat anymore, right? Unless it's in a package, yeah, that you've got to look for. If you have, chametz, a bag of pretzels, or something edible, something bigger than a kazayit, bigger than olive size, yes, you have to do that. You have to look for that. In fact, in your search for chametz, don't forget to get in the car and take a look there as well. Check the glove box, maybe the trunk if necessary. You put in groceries all year. Potentially something could have fallen out. Maybe a box of cookies is still back there, right? It's part of the search for chametz, absolutely. But what you're looking for is not the few crumbs technically under people's feet, right? That's not what we're looking for. We're looking for actual significant chametz. That's what we're looking for. Now, that should be the letter of the law. I want to point out one aspect of the law that I'm somewhat I'm unsure of, and I'm not even sure where to look this up because everywhere I've looked, I couldn't find any discussion about it. But here's what the Shulchan Aruch tells us. It tells us that if it's the size of an olive, it's problematic. You have to remove it from the premises, right? Not the size of an olive. And not only that, but a container or any type of receptacle, any type of kli is mitzaref crumbs to make it a kazayis. It combines the small amounts to make it one. So for example, if I have a container of breadcrumbs, okay, osem breadcrumbs, okay, even though each one is very, very small, but if they're in one container, that container combines all the breadcrumbs as if they're one and makes it now the full size. So if I have a kazayis worth of breadcrumbs there, that would be problematic. See, if it wasn't in a container, if it was on the floor, I would count each crumb by itself. Is it a kazayis? Is it an olive size or not? So the question that I'm doubtful about is the car. Do we view it like a receptacle?
Come, take more.
Say again?
Sorry.
No, okay, no problem. So the question: do we view a car? A car is not right. Is not connected to the ground. So do we view it like some kind of receptacle, some kind of kli that all the crumbs in it would now be combined to make a kazayit? That's something I'm unsure about, and it's potentially yes. Okay, there's two sides of this coin. I didn't see anyone discuss it yet. I'm kind of curious about it myself. But if that would be true, and you have a lot of crumbs there, that if you combine all those crumbs, right, kids are eating all the time, and there's lots of stuff on the floor, so then maybe you would have an obligation, actually, according to the law, to vacuum the car to make sure there's less than a kazayis total. Okay, but everywhere else, you look at each piece by itself, so that would make it a little simpler. Okay. So that's the first very, very important law, and very important in terms of how to prepare for Pesach. You don't have to worry about crumbs. Rule number one: only significant chametz. You don't have to clean technically for Pesach. I mean, this should come as a complete shocker to people. There's no obligation to clean except for have a nice house for Yontiv and to have it orderly so you can do your check. That's the letter of the law. And when you're checking, you actually have to literally look for chametz. Okay, and that's significant chametz, not crumbs. Okay, that's the letter of the law. What people do is another discussion. All that stuff is not necessarily obligatory. Some of it might be customary. And again, I'm talking about the entire house minus the kitchen. Okay, the kitchen we'll get to in a minute. Now, when you're doing your search, I want to add one more point that's very important. The search for chametz is only required in places where chametz is sometimes brought. Okay, you do not need to search places that chametz is never brought. Okay, let me give you an example. Maybe you have in your house a linen closet, right? A closet somewhere, maybe in the hallway, right? That has sheets and towels and things like that, right? Now, typically, most people that I know would never put food in that type of closet, right? That closet is pretty much, you keep just very simple things, very specific things, and no food would ever make it into that closet. If that's the type of house you have, and I would imagine most of us, that is the type of house we have, the linen closet does not need to be checked for Pesach. Okay, another example, the bathroom. Most of us do not bring food into our bathrooms, right? So the bathroom would not need to be checked for Pesach, not the cabinets, not the drawers, not the shower, not the soap holder thing. You don't have to check any of that. None of that is required to check. An attic, if you have an attic where you store, I don't know, old suitcases and a bunch of things that you should have thrown out 3 years ago, and all that just sitting there in your attic, you don't need to check it unless you sometimes go hang out there with some cookies or something, or someone else does. Now, what if you have small children? If you have small children, all these rules change because small children are capable of doing all kinds of things with their food, right? You give them a bag of pretzels, you say, stay here, and they're off to who knows where. And then you find it, half a year later and it's changed colors, right? So if you have small children in the house, these rules may change. So every home is really going to be different in terms of where are the places that chametz could potentially be found. But if, let's say, small children aside, if you have, you don't have to check places that chametz should never wind up. I'll give you an example. Some people, they will never bring food into the bedroom. I think that's a beautiful rule. I certainly feel that way. Again, my children may not feel that way, but food should never go into a bedroom. If you have a home where food never goes into a bedroom, you do not need to check your bedrooms, right? And I'll tell you, I'll take it a step further. Even if food does go into the bedrooms, I would reckon to say that the closet is probably fine. Right? Even if someone's sneaking food into the bedroom and eating in bed, right, or all kinds of places they shouldn't, maybe they're stuffing, treats in their drawers, their night tables, or whatever. The closet, I would imagine they're not going into to eat, right? Unless they're small children, then again, they can be making stashes anywhere, right? We've been sometimes blown away by the places our little ones have made stashes of nosh and things like that they shouldn't have. Now, here's a question. What if a suitcase has a power bar in it and you are unaware? Do you check all suitcases? It sounds like you're saying that there is a power bar, and a power bar, I'm assuming, is chametz. I have no idea what exactly this power bar is. Some kind of energy bar, I'm assuming. And now it's in one of them. That's the case I'm understanding. And you're not sure which one. Should you check all of them? I'm assuming that's your question right now, based on the question I'm saying. Okay, which is a possibility. Okay. If you don't know that it's there, meaning you have no reason to assume, right? See, the thing is with suitcases, when you pack up to go places, it is quite feasible that you put in food, right? I mean, not everything fits in the carry-on, right? And it is feasible. And when you unpacked, you may very likely have not have taken everything out. So it is actually, I would think a suitcase is something that does need to be checked. The solution for not checking suitcases would be to sell them. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Actually, a phenomenal solution to making the check a little bit easier for us, because checking, can be quite time consuming. You think about it. If you have to actually check every spot in the house, and if you have little people, that means you're even checking bathroom cabinets. I'll be honest with you. Little people can bring it anywhere, right? Just to be aware, if you're little people, right, you have little kids and they're bringing chametz, they're probably not putting it on the high shelves. So yeah, I think you're still safe on the high shelves and in the closets and in the bathrooms. But the lower shelves, perhaps a little kid can do something like that. So yeah, you'd have to check all these places. To make it easier, you could potentially sell parts of the home. Okay, and that's part of the sale of chametz that we're going to talk about in a little bit. That can make it a little bit easier. So a suitcase, if you're not traveling for the 8 days, there's no need to keep it. Just include it in the sale, and that would make your life a little bit easier in terms of that. Okay, so I hope I answered that question. By the way, I'm only talking about chametz. If this energy bar, just to throw out there as well, if you know that it's not actual chametz, it's maybe kitniot, it has peanuts in it and chocolate, and there's no actual chametz, when we say chametz, we mean it's made from the 5 grains. Barley, rye, oats, wheat, and spelt. Did I get them all? Browse, barley, rye, oat, wheats, and spelt. Barley, rye, oats, wheat. Yeah, I counted 5. Those are the 5 grains. Only those things can make chametz. Everything else, kitniot and legumes, it's all customary. You're allowed to own that on Pesach. So we're not talking about that. All right. So that's a very, very important law as well. Realize it depends on the person. It's very important to realize, someone asked me, does a night table need to be checked? It depends on the person. Are you the kind of person that would stash food away in your night table or not? I, for one, would not. I do not think food belongs in the bedroom, but I'm not the only one on earth, right? Not everybody agrees with me. So it depends on you. If you potentially could have put it there at any point, you check it. They used to tell us, growing up, check your talis bag in shul, because in shul there's always food, nosh being given out or whatever. And sometimes kids come, and they put in the daddy's talis bag, and now the talis bag needs to be checked. So you kind of have to know yourself, know your personality, and where things can wind up. Okay. Another thing very important about the checking for chametz, if it's very cumbersome. Now, it's important to realize, in the time the Shulchan Aruch was written, people didn't have 2,000 and 3,000 square foot homes. Okay, this is something to realize, both in terms of the preparation that we have for ourselves. People never had homes the way we do today. Okay, so the job of, first of all, cleaning, if you're cleaning for Pesach, it became a lot harder, and checking for Pesach became a lot harder, right? It's much, much harder today. We have large homes, right? You can go back and just look at the old Yerushalmi homes and the way they lived. They lived in literally one-bedroom homes, and they raised families, and that was all they had. And their job preparing for Chametz for Pesach was relatively simple. If you only live in a bedroom and a half, then that's fine. You don't have much work to do. But if you have a large home, it's a lot of work, and your checking is going to be a lot of work. You're allowed to break it up in a few nights. In other words, let's say Thursday night is the night of the checking. You can actually say, look, my house is too big to check everything in one night. I'm going to start Wednesday night. I'm going to do Wednesday night half the house, and then Thursday night half the house. And that way you make it a little less cumbersome, a little less difficult. You can do that. You can actually do it all the way from Purim. Technically, you can start already, checking room by room, I guess. If you have a very, very large home and you don't think you'll get to it, you can do a little bit every night. The blessing on the search, you only do on Thursday night. Okay, so you don't do it, you only do it on the last night. That's the only time to make the blessing. But the search itself, you're allowed to do. If you're, let's say, leaving work on Wednesday and you're not going to be coming back to work, and this is your stuff there, it's your office, and you have all kinds of things in the drawers, so check it before you leave. That'll be your search. You started your search for chametz already, and then you don't have to go back and check it again. I'm just giving examples of where this might be relevant. You can do such a thing. Okay, so you can break it up in a couple of nights. In fact, there are those who say that, and here's just to kind of take it back to square one, there are those who say that the custom of people who do this very, very deep clean, what happens is when they do that clean all the way from Purim, that deep clean is actually a form of searching for chametz. And they're actually searching for chametz the whole time. And by the time they got to Erev Pesach, the night before Passover, they have nothing left. And that's why they put out the 10 pieces of bread. There's a school of thought that says that's where this custom actually started from, because people already searched the whole house. They were done. They had no work to do the night before Pesach. So they had to create work for themselves, and they hid the bread. But again, that's not really the letter of the law by any stretch of the imagination. That's not what was intended. What was intended is you search for chametz before Pesach. Okay, so hopefully that answers a lot of questions about the search. Okay, no question. That answers a lot of questions about the search, how it's done. You can also have other people help you in the search. If you have children who are responsible and capable, you can have them do a section of the home, for example, their bedroom and things of that nature, right? You don't have to do it all yourself, right? You can have other people participate as well. Oh, interesting question. If you rent an Airbnb during Chol HaMoed, let's say you go away for Chol HaMoed for a day, and you rent an Airbnb, this is a question that has been sent to me. And you notice they have all kinds of cabins. You have to do bedikas chametz in the Airbnb where you are about to stay. Do you own any of this chametz? Do you now own it? Once you rent the room, is everything there yours? If you find a Twix bar, can you eat it? All these wonderful questions. Well, obviously, if it's Pesach, you won't be able to eat it. I just mean in general. Do you own the stuff that's in the room? So the answer is no, you don't own the stuff that's in the room necessarily, unless it may be ownerless. It may be like you assume that the person who left already realizes he's not going to get back, and therefore it's ownerless. And if you choose to take it, there would be room to say that that's okay. That's a good question. But if you want to know about Pesach, do you have to check it? The answer is yes, you do have to check it. So if you get into an Airbnb, you actually have to go checking the room. And the reason is not because you own it, but because there's a concern you may come to eat it, right? Even though you're not necessarily owning it, we mentioned, the rabbi said, even if you don't own it, you still might eat it if it's around. So technically, yes, if you go into an Airbnb on Chol HaMoed Pesach, bring a flashlight and or a candle and start the search. Hopefully you didn't get a huge 2,000 square foot Airbnb. You got one of the one-roomers. You do a quick search around. It should be relatively clean. It should take a few minutes to look around, make sure there's no chametz anywhere, and then you're good to go. Yes, you can do a search after Pesach started. In fact, you have an obligation to do a search after Pesach started. I mentioned this in show. If let's say you starting to do your search, you did your whole search Thursday night, and then Pesach morning, let's say we're talking about Sunday morning, you wake up and you realize, I never searched, this area. I never searched my stroller. Sometimes people forget about the stroller. If you have a small child and you have a stroller, that basket underneath has like everything in it, right? That you ever brought to or from anywhere you ever went. There's lots of junk in there. You didn't think about it because you were busy with the home and you have that stroller sitting there and you didn't think you actually have to check it. And it occurs to you on Pesach morning. So the answer is yes, you absolutely have to check it. You have to check it as soon as you can. If you can check it with Cholamoid, for example, you would check it with a flashlight. If you find chametz, you would have a bonfire in the backyard. Yes, that's actually obligatory to do that. Okay. Moving right along. Okay, so we spoke about two ways to avoid the prohibition of chametz. So the first way we mentioned is nullification. You simply say it's all ownerless like the dust of the earth. And number two is you actually have to literally physically get rid of it. Now there's actually a third way to get rid of chametz, and that is to sell it to the non-Jew. Okay, selling it to a Jew only helps if he'll eat it before Pesach. But selling it to a non-Jew, you don't care when he eats it, right? As long as it's his, it's not mine. I don't own it. It's not a problem. Now, we mentioned that even though you sold it, you can't leave it out in the open. You actually have to put it away. The Shulchan Aruch, the Gemara talks about putting up a mechitza around it, right? That's why we have a custom that we put into a cabinet. We close the cabinet, and we even seal, tape down the cabinet or whatever it is to make sure you don't accidentally open it. And maybe you put a sign on it. This is sold to the non-Jew. And that's the way we go about it, nowadays. We make cabinets. And in fact, I mentioned this is a wonderful idea, to get rid of chametz that you own, right? Number one. Number two, to make areas that you don't need to check, right? Let's say you come to, I mentioned this last year, let's say you have a closet with coats in it, right? Winter coats. And you come to the realization that most likely on Pesach, I won't need a winter coat. So why do I need to, search the closet, assuming it's even a place you bring chametz. Let's say you potentially bring chametz in there. Or let's say the pockets of your coat potentially have food in it. Again, this really depends on the person and on the family and on the situation. But you can simply technically say, I'm not going to need a winter coat this year. It looks like the temperatures, the forecast looks good. Let me sell the entire closet to you. Seal off the closet, right? It's closed, put a sign up, sold to the guy, done. You don't have to worry about the closet. Okay, if you want, you can pull out one coat and sell the closet. You can make your life very easy. I recommend this in the kitchen. There's no reason to have every cabinet available. There's a good chance for a week you can manage on half the cabinets in your kitchen, right? So clean out whatever cabinets you're going to need, and the rest of them seal and sell. When you sell it, you don't have to search it. You don't have to worry what's in it. You can get rid of it, okay? So that's a very simple approach to deal with. You sell it to the non-Jew. I want to make it clear, when you sell chametz, actual chametz to a non-Jew, this is a binding sale. It's a real sale. It's not just some symbolic type of activity. No, you're actually selling that stuff to the non-Jew. If you have that liquor cabinet and it's worth $500, you're actually selling that to the non-Jew, because if you weren't actually selling it, you would have a prohibition of owning it. So you're actually selling it. If he would knock on your door and say, hi, I'm the owner of this contract. I bought all this. Thank you very much. I'm going to go have a nice time. You actually have to let him go and do that. I want you to know this ahead of time. This is the letter of the law. This is not a stringency. It's an actual sale. It's meaningful. Usually he doesn't come knocking on the door. Okay, I guess it's better that way. But technically he can. Okay, and it has to be your mindset. It's certainly my mindset. The mindset, if you're selling chametz, it's a 100% real deal. Now, he is obligating himself to pay for your chametz. Okay, so when they make the contract, they kind of the rabbi makes a number of what he thinks all the chametz in the community is worth, and the guy obligates himself to pay that amount of money. He doesn't pay it up front. He gives the down payment, and he owes that money. But if he would technically come and collect all his chametz, he would have to pay, for it. So you don't have to worry about him, about you losing your stuff. But yes, it's a real sale. It's a meaningful, real sale. Nothing symbolic here. Okay. All right, so that is that's the idea of selling to a non-Jew. I hope that was clear how that works and why we do it. We do it for two reasons. One, to not go through a tremendous amount of loss by having to throw out chametz, for example. That's valuable, number one. And number two, we do it so we don't have to search the whole house. We can search parts of the house and sell parts of the house. Okay, so I think we covered everything about owning chametz. Let's get to the other prohibition. We said there's two prohibitions. One is owning chametz, and one is eating chametz. The owning chametz was the one that people went crazy over, and you really don't have to. Eating chametz is the one that we're going to talk about now. Now, eating chametz, it sounds very simple. You can't eat chametz. Simple enough. Now, I'll tell you why it's not so simple. Number one, typically the rule is if a small amount of a prohibited item falls into a kosher food, right? There are times you're allowed to eat the kosher food. Okay. So, for example, you have a pot of meat soup cooking on your fire. I gave this example last year. I don't remember, but if I don't remember, most likely you don't remember. You have a meat soup cooking on your fire, and next to it you have a counter, and you decide to prepare yourself a cup of coffee, and you pour some milk into your coffee, and as you pour the milk, it comes out with too much energy, and a droplet of milk pops up and falls into the soup. Okay, and you have a meat soup cooking, and now a droplet of milk just fell in. Okay, moral of the story, don't pour your coffee so close to your meat soup. Now, let's say it happened, okay? Stuff happens, and you call your local rabbi and you explain the situation. He may very well say to you, listen, how big was the droplet that fell? And you say, well, it was around yay big. How big is the pot of soup? If the pot of soup is 60 times the droplet that fell into it, again, if it fell into the liquid, there's actually, you'd be surprised how much literature there is on exactly where it fell and how it fell and all that. But let's just say it fell into the liquid. Keep it simple. If you have 60 times the kosher keneged against the not kosher, it's fine. So if you have 60 times the soup against the milk, it's fine. Not only if milk fell into it, if a piece of bacon fell into it, if whatever it might be not kosher, 60 times means it's usually okay. Okay, again, still ask the question, even though I gave you now a key to many of the answers. Nonetheless, ask the question because scenarios change very, very easily. Okay, so that's the halacha all over the Torah and all kinds of prohibitions. Prohibited food falls in, usually it's nullified in 60. When it comes to Pesach, say the rabbis, it is not nullified in 60. And what that means is no matter how big the chametz is, it could be what we call mashu chametz, which means the smallest crumb in the world. If it falls into your food on Pesach, it is prohibited. You cannot eat that food. You have to burn it like you're burning chametz. Okay, so that's level of stringency of chametz. Why is it so severe? Again, we mentioned chametz is more severe. We treat it more severely. There's a rabbinic law. We treat it more severely. So that's the first place we find why eating chametz is not as simple as it is everywhere else. Another example. Okay, here's another example, and I don't want to get off topic too much, but something called nosin tam lefgam, which means if I have a pot that's more than 24 hours old and I cook in it, okay, so let's say I have a meat pot that's 24 hours old. It wasn't used for 24 hours. In other words, and be clear, I have a meat pot that wasn't used for 24 hours, and then by accidentally cooking it, milk. Okay, the law is that milk is not prohibited. Okay, because the flavor, the taste in that pot, it was alive and well for 24 hours, but after 24 hours, we say it gets stale, it gets bad, and it no longer enhances the milk. So it's no longer problematic. Okay, once again, if such a thing happens in the home, pick up the phone or whatever. You can text me or whoever else you want to rely on. But the point is, typically there's a leniency if something's more than 24 hours old. A container or a kli or any type of pot is more than 24 hours old. When it comes to Pesach, this leniency does not apply. Okay? Even a pot that is a chametz pot that's more than 24 hours old can still make food prohibited on Pesach. So now, when we get these two prohibitions, it tells us that Pesach must be treated more meticulously than other prohibitions in the Torah. And this is why when I said this is the rule about the home, you don't have to worry about crumbs, that's minus the kitchen. The kitchen is different. The kitchen is where you're preparing food. Here, there may indeed be a concern that a mashu of chametz, the smallest crumb, the smallest amount of chametz can wind up in your food. And that's why it's more severe and we have to be more meticulous. Very likely, the level of meticulousness that started in the kitchen ends up spreading to the whole house. And that's why we have this custom today where people are going all over the place, scrubbing every corner. You technically only have to do that in places where you're preparing food. Okay. What this means is in the kitchen, you actually do have extra work to do. You have to obviously scrub, all the surfaces clean. If you're going to use a cabinet on Pesach, you have to actually go into the cabinet and make sure there's no crumbs in those cabinets, because those crumbs, they can't wind up in your food. Even though there's no prohibition to eat it, for example, it's unhygienic. It might be perfectly fine to eat, by the way, in the cabinet. But let's say it's not an hygienic place or whatever. If it winds up in your food, it's a problem. Okay, so you have to clean out those cabinets totally. You have to be extremely sanitary around the kitchen. I was told you have to, when I was younger, you have to be careful about places where your hands touch as you prepare food. So for example, if your hands touch a drawer handle, right? So that drawer handle must be clean for Pesach, because if there's the slightest crumb on that drawer handle and your hand touched it, so now your hand is going to have that crumb or whatever it is, and it's going to go into your food. So the drawer handles have to be cleaned, detailed. The light switch in the kitchen has to be detailed because you touch that, right? The kitchen phone. Do people still have kitchen phones? I don't know. I think one day we'll have to tell our kids about this phone that sat in the kitchen and had this curly wire, right? And women used to know how to balance that on their ear and not get tangled up as they walked around and cooked and did things. But anyways, that kitchen, if you have a kitchen phone, right, it has to be clean because you touch it while you cook, while you prepare food. If it's not clean, if it has any smallest amount of chametz, just give you an example, flour. Okay, we treat flour like it's chametz. Okay, so flour, and flour goes everywhere. You know that, right? So if flour is on that thing and it goes on your fingers, it goes into your food, right? So it's got to be literally, this is a place to go. If you want to go overboard, the kitchen is the place to do it. The refrigerator, both the top of the shelf and the bottom of the shelf need to be clean. Why is that? Because sometimes, at least in my home, we stack up things in the kitchen and they go in, right? And sometimes food can touch the bottom of the shelf. So that's a place that could potentially now, that can wind up in your food on Pesach. So the shelves probably need to come out and need to be, right, clean. Oh, here's the question. How about, there's not even a question, actually giving me a suggestion. How about using cleaning spray for the kitchen? Yes, excellent idea. When you do clean the kitchen, it's a wonderful idea to use some kind of cleaning spray, some kind of ammonia or bleach or anything of that nature that makes any contact with food and makes the food inedible. Okay, the reason for doing this is, let's say in all your cleaning and all your scrubbing, you miss a crumb somewhere. Okay, so that crumb, you said you're not allowed to eat it, right? That's prohibited. That's chametz, and even if it falls into the largest amount, it's prohibited to eat it. Now, if you use one of these maybe disinfectant type of cleaners like a bleach or an ammonia or anything like that, if it goes on that crumb is now inedible for anybody, and that crumb is now not problematic if it winds up in your food. So this is a wonderful solution if you're afraid you might miss a crumb, right? And it just makes sense, right? We're humans, to use some kind of cleaning spray, disinfecting spray, Lysol spray, whatever they are, you can go ahead and get those. Yeah, you should still try to clean them as much as you can, but if you miss a crumb, it's okay because you got you made it inedible. Can I cover, here's a good question. Can I sell part of my fridge and just cover up that portion? Yeah, you can. It's a great idea. In fact, if you have things in your fridge that you plan on selling, a good idea is, I usually do this. I take the bottom of the fridge, for example, the bottom drawer or something like that. And you just put everything in there that you need to sell, close it, tape it shut, put a sign on that tape. The reason you tape it is because otherwise people, when they go into your fridge, they just habitually open the drawers, right? So you tape it shut so no one habitually opens it. Sold to the non-Jew. Put it in the contract if you remember, or if you're planned ahead of time when you do the sale to the non-Jew, put it in there, and that becomes sold as well. So that's a wonderful solution to that. Yes, absolutely. Okay, freezer as well, right? Same thing. Okay. Okay, so that would be the way so again, where is it worthwhile to be meticulous? It would be in the kitchen. So all that cleaning that we do in the kitchen, that makes sense. Another place to clean meticulously, people don't think about this one, but is the bottom of the cabinets. Right? If you have cabinets that sit over a counter, you don't realize this, but when you put a pot on that counter, all the steam from that pot goes up to the cabinet above it, to the bottom of that cabinet. Actually, you might be surprised how much, can I use the word schmutz? That's an English word, right? How much schmutz collects on the bottom of that cabinet, by the way. So that stuff very likely has chametz schmutz sitting there, okay? So if now you put a Pesach pot, now that steam is now going to connect with whatever's over there. So a good idea is, while you're doing that deep clean in the kitchen, to wipe down with a spray, perhaps, the bottom of the cabinets as well, right? So make sure there's nothing there that's edible, that's chametz, that's edible, that can wind up in your food. Just to give you an idea of just how far perhaps you have to go. I'm not going to talk about koshering the kitchen right now. I think there's a lot to talk about, and I don't want to keep going and going. But if you are interested, definitely koshering the kitchens to get we mentioned before, the flavors that sit in the countertops or in the sink or on the stovetop. If you'd like, there's wonderful resources online. You can literally read them, step-by-step guide to koshering. If you have any questions, obviously, be in touch. The CRC puts out one, the Star K, and they're phenomenal. They go step by step. They go address every material of countertop, of stove, electric, gas, etc. So I recommend doing that. I'm not going to address it right now in this class. Okay, so hopefully I did go through a lot. Hopefully I clarified a lot of points. Hopefully the stuff I tell you is going to make your life a little bit easier in terms of the preparation for Pesach. Crumbs, in other words, are they a problem or not? Crumbs that are not edible or not at least likely to be eaten, and they're smaller than a kazayis. If they're anywhere else in the house, forget about them. If you want to clean up for Pesach, for Yantif, to have a nice clean house, wonderful, go for it. It's not part of Pesach preparation. In the kitchen, however, obviously, you go the extra mile, make sure everything's spick and span and clean, and go ahead and do that koshering. Okay, so I'm going to end this class here. Next week, we'll try to finish up anything we may have left out, and we'll go more into the details of the practical, the how-to, and especially the Shabbos leading into Pesach. And if you have any questions and you didn't ask it here, feel free to reach out to me, text me or call me or whatever, and I'll be happy to discuss. I wish everybody a wonderful night. Take care.